Another episode in the drama of the Donald Trump classified documents case. The focus? Trump's request to throw out some evidence that had been collected at Mar-a-Lago during the search. Now today, Judge Cannon heard arguments on two other key issues. The first one, another attempt by Donald Trump's team to throw out the entire case, and they argue that this guy, Special Counsel Jack Smith, is somehow unlawfully funded. Now there has not been a decision about that yet. Then she heard the prosecution's request for a gag order, arguing that his statements are inciting threats against FBI agents. The judge appeared skeptical about that argument. She didn't actually make a ruling, but she did chastise federal prosecutor David Harbach, saying, quote, "I don't appreciate your tone." That she would appreciate decorum at all times, but, quote, "if you aren't able to do that, I'm sure one of your colleagues can take up arguing this motion." Now, prosecutors argue the gag order is needed because Trump's rhetoric is so dangerous, and he's making false statements about the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, saying that agents were authorized to take him out because of the standard language that's contained in the actual text of the warrant that does allow for the use of deadly force without saying that you ought to use it. Now, Harbach saying, quote, "The government is at a loss to conceive why Mr. Trump would say something so false, so inconceivable, or inviting of violence," to which Judge Cannon asked, quote, "Where do you see a call for violence?" Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, arguing what Trump said was purely political. Quote, "The attacks very clearly are against President Biden." Now, with me now, we've got Devlin Barrett, a law enforcement reporter and co-author of the Trump Trials newsletter for The Washington Post. Also here, CNN legal commentator and former Trump lawyer, Tim Parlatore. I'll begin with you, Devlin, because you were in the courtroom today. So tell me about what was going on. And what is the likelihood that the prosecutors will actually get the gag order they're asking for?
I think this has always been a long shot. The judge has been skeptical of the argument for this gag order since the prosecutors first made it. To be honest, David Harbach, the prosecutor, didn't do himself any favors in his presentation today. And the judge, I think, pushed him on a number of points that he did not have immediate at hand answers for. So it feels like the judge is disinclined at this point to rule in the government's favor here, but she did ask for more submissions. So I don't think this is a settled conversation yet, but it has not gone well for the government.
Well, talking about this tone comment, that I don't appreciate your tone, I want to know what his tone was, because there was another moment when the judge warned prosecutors abruptly not to interrupt her. I mean, Cannon was criticized in the past for her handling, but tell you what the dynamic inside the court.
So remember, this is about human beings, right? It's not really scripted.
Thank you for acknowledging that lawyers are human beings, Devlin. No one ever admits it. Thank you so much. Humans. Go ahead.
Today was a very, very human day in court, Laura, a very human day. Because what happened was the judge kept interrupting David Harbach, the prosecutor, as he was making his arguments. David Harbach got, I think, a little flustered and a little frustrated by the interruptions. And, you know, this is probably too nerdy a point, but it felt for much of the day like an appeals court hearing as opposed to a trial court hearing. And I think some of the lawyers have more different degrees of experience with the appeals court type of back and forth than trial court back and forth. And Harbach basically got frustrated and said at one point in frustration, "I'm trying to give you the answer, but you keep interrupting." He didn't say that verbatim, but that was what he was conveying to the judge. And what the judge basically said was, "Okay, cool your jets. You're going to get to say whatever you want to say, but I have questions along the way, and I'm the judge, so I get to ask some questions." And I think he understood that he had sort of not done well in the moment and came back to it. But to be honest, he had a couple problems during the day. That was the most obvious one, but he had other sort of like practical problems in terms of his presentation that the judge was not impressed with. And it did not go well for him. And to be honest, they have been down this road before. She has chastised them before for not making fulsome arguments on this issue of a gag or essentially bail modification, to be clear. But, you know, it's a little surprising to me that they weren't better prepared for what they have to assume was a skeptical audience.
Let me turn to you, Tim, on this, because, you know, having a gag order request for Donald Trump is really par for the course now in several of his cases, as you have seen. Each of them are different for a variety of reasons. But prosecutors were citing an armed attack on an FBI office after Trump posted about the search in Mar-a-Lago. And the agent said, quote, someone said, would be hunted down and slaughtered in their own homes, after which we're going to slaughter your whole effing family. This is the connection they were trying to drive the point home, that his statements about the text of the warrant led to things like this or could potentially lead to things like that. Should that have been enough?
Just by itself, if you can actually make the connection, then it's something that that is worthwhile bringing up. But what it sounds to me like is that they have, threats against the FBI and an armed attack on an FBI office, comments by Donald Trump, and no connection between the two. And so that's really, it sounds to me like what the judge was, pushing them on is, hey, you're saying this happened, but if you can't give me anything to suggest the connection between the two, other than that you're Jack Smith and that's what you believe, then that's not enough for a gag order.
Isn't the potential at times? I mean, they have to make their own arguments.
Right.
Be it far from me to make them for them, but showing that there has been a connection as opposed to a prospective possibility. Say this was a jury trial already. The prospect of someone being harmed might be enough for a judge. But this would not be.
And you brought up a point earlier that these have become par for the course for Trump cases. They are not par for the course in any other circumstance. Gag orders are extremely rare, and they're rare because they are unconstitutional, and they are only allowed in very, very limited specific circumstances. And what I've been seeing throughout these cases is by continuously bringing gag orders against Donald Trump, the Justice Department and Manhattan District Attorney's Office, they're kind of peeling back, what the standard is and getting judges to say, well, in this case, I'll allow it because this defendant is so bad. It's the same kind of stuff that we saw back in the 80s with a lot of these organized crime cases in New York, where judges would say, well, this defendant is so bad, so yes, we're going to impose this a lesser standard. And the case law then moves back further and further from what the rule is because of this defendant. And what that ends up with is a situation where you've created a rule that becomes much more lenient, and then gag orders start to become par for the course for everybody.
If this were closer to the trial date, one has not been set, of course, in this matter, the idea of a gag order might become more of an urgent issue as opposed to a prospective one. Because talk about the length of time would be implemented would be really for as long as it took to set a trial date. It could be indefinite.
It could. And here's the thing is that gag orders, generally speaking, are for protection of the integrity of the trial. And so if you're trying to protect the jury pool, that is one of the things that is a viable reason for having a gag order. If you're afraid that he is inciting violence, if they truly had evidence that he was inciting violence, they would bring a separate charge against him and they would get a preliminary injunction in that case for the incitement of violence. But because they don't have any evidence of that, they're trying to kind of shoehorn it into this different proceeding, and I think that's what the judge is really calling him out on.